Well, good morning, everyone. If we haven't had a chance to meet yet, my name's Garry. I'm one of the pastors here. Glad that you've decided to spend some of your snowy Valentine's family day-long weekend with us. Man, there's a lot going on this weekend. Big thank you to Peter for filling in last minute. That's just the way the weather goes, but we want to keep everyone safe. So that's what we did, and Peter rocked it, man. So good. Just a quick thank you to all of you who have been dropping donations off for our initiative this month called Blanket Nanaimo. All kinds of stuff has been brought in. The big need right now is socks and gloves. So if you have any socks or gloves hanging around, you can go to our website, themeetingplace.org, scroll down, you'll see a button that says Blanket Nanaimo. Jump on there, it'll tell you everything you need to know where you can drop those things off. But thank you to all of you who have stood up to the challenge once again. You guys are just absolutely amazing, so thank you. So, have you ever had someone ask you a dumb question? Well, if you haven't, you just have, because that was a dumb question, because I think most of us, if not all of us, at some point have had somebody ask us, or maybe we've asked someone, a dumb question. And I don't know if you've noticed this, but oftentimes when people are going to ask you a dumb question, they preface it with, "Do you mind if I ask you a dumb question?" I remember when I was about 14 or 15 years old, one of my chores was to cut the lawn, and so I thought, hey, I'm going to cut the lawn, be the good son that I was, back then, and so I hauled the gas lawnmower that we had out of the shed, and I started yanking on the starter cord. And I pulled, and I pulled, and I pulled, and this thing just would not start. I pulled, it felt like hours. It was probably only a couple of minutes, but man, I just could not get this thing started. And I was starting to get frustrated, and my mom must have heard my, attempts at trying to start this, and probably some colorful language, maybe, not saying for sure. And so she came out of the house, and she looked down at me. She was on this deck that was up above me, and she says, "Do you mind if I ask you a stupid question?" And she says, and I kind of looked at her, with a funny look. She's like, "Oh, this should be good." And she said, "I know I'm just your mom, and I'm not a mechanic or anything like that, but is there gas in it?" And I looked at her, and the first thing that went through my mind was, that was a dumb question. But I said to her, "Of course there's gas in it. What do you think, I'm dumb?" And she says, "Oh, okay, well, just thought I'd help." And she walked back into the house, and I returned to pulling this pull cord. And I yanked on it and pulled, and this thing would not start. And I was so frustrated, I said, "You know what? I'm not doing this." And so I grabbed the lawnmower, and I was pushing it back to the shed, and just before I put it away, I thought, And so I unscrewed the cap, and again, I'll deny this later. I unscrewed the cap. It was out of gas. Stupid question? Maybe not. Now, one thing I've noticed, and maybe you have too, is often when people ask, "Can I ask you a stupid question?" what they're trying to do is they want to ask you something really important, but kind of just, dial down the tension a little bit. They want to ask us something that may be really important that's meant to help us, like, is there gas in it? That kind of thing, right? And sometimes those seemingly stupid questions that we're asked can sometimes change the trajectory of our life. Questions, I'm thinking of questions like, someone comes up to you and they go, "Are you sure you want to spend the rest of your life with him or her? Or what did you think was going to happen hanging around that crowd of people that what did you expect?" Or how about this one? "Did you really expect something different to happen when you kept doing the same thing over and over again?" I mean, we all know what that's the definition of insanity, right? We're in a series, as Peter mentioned, called Who. We started it way back in December. And what we're trying to do is dig into the life of Jesus so we can learn to get to know him better than we currently do, with the hopes that as we get to know him better, we can learn to trust him more with our life and begin to live the abundant life that he talks about. And today we're going to watch as Jesus asks somebody a seemingly stupid question. But as we'll see, it's a question that actually has life-changing implications, not just for the person that he asked it to, but for you and I today. This story is found in the fourth book of the New Testament, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. We were in the book of John last week when we looked at Jesus' first miracle when he turned water into wine. This is the same book. It's just a few chapters later. And what's happening in this story is Jesus is in Jerusalem, which is like the religious capital for the Jews in Israel. That's where everything happened. And he was there for one of these Jewish holy days. All throughout the Jewish calendar, they had these different feasts and festivals that they would hold. And if you were a Jew, you were expected to travel to Jerusalem from wherever it was you lived and be part of these feasts. It was just something that you did. And so Jesus was there. We don't know what feast it was. A lot of scholars say it's not that important. What it's pointed to is that Jerusalem would have been bursting at the seams with people. And Jesus is there, and here's what John writes. Listen to this. He says, afterward, Jesus returned to Jerusalem for one of the Jewish holy days. Holy days is where we get our name holidays from, okay? Inside the city, near the sheep gate, was the pool of Bethesda with 5 covered porches. And then he writes this, crowds of sick people, blind, lame, or paralyzed, lay on the porches. This pool that's in the center of the city is full of crowds of sick people. They were all gathered there for one reason. They were hoping that they could be the first one into the pool after it bubbled up and be healed. You see, the belief back then was that an angel of God would come down and stir the water with the tip of its wing. And after it had stirred and bubbled up the water, the first person in that water would be healed. And so crowds of people with all kinds of illnesses would show up hoping that they would be the first in. Now, they've uncovered this pool. It's under a church in Jerusalem called St. Anne's. You can actually, if you go to Jerusalem today, once we're allowed to travel again, that's maybe something you might want to do, you can actually see these pools that John's talking about here. And so that's what's happening. And it says crowds of sick people, blind, lame, paralyzed, lay on the porches. One of the men lying there had been sick for 38 years. When Jesus saw him and learned he had been ill for a long time, he asked him, would you like to get well? Now, is it just me, or is that a stupid question? The guy has been lying sick for the last 38 years. No doubt he's experiencing all kinds of pain. Every day his family or friends have to feed him, bathe him, clothe him, pick him up on his mat, and take him to this pool, place him down, with the hopes that that would be the day he would be the first into the pool, and then he could just walk home and he'd be healed. 38 years this has been going on. And Jesus shows up, learns all this stuff about the guy, and he asks him, do you want to get well? Really? You can't come up with it? Like, really? That would be like, being at the hospital with 2 busted up knees, and you're writhing there in pain on the bed, and the doctor walks in and says, so do you want to get well? It's like, nah, I think I'll just lay here, just you go home to your family, it's all good. Of course you're not going to say that. You're going to say, yes, I want to get well. Why do you think I'm here? Do you want to be well? It seems like a dumb question until you sit with it for a minute. Have you ever had someone ask you for help? And you offer them some advice or some help, and then a couple of months later they come back and they ask for help or advice with the same problem, and it just seems to be over and over again. You're having that same conversation. They're having the same struggle with the same thing, and it just seems to never change. Maybe it's time to ask them the question, do you want to get well? Jesus looks at this man and he asks, would you like to get well? Check out the man's response. He says, I can't. I can't. Jesus asked him a yes or no question. And he answers with, I can't. I can't, sir, the sick man said, for I have no one to put me into the pool when the water bubbles up. Someone always gets there ahead of me. What this guy, his answers with an excuse. Basically, his answer is, I would like to get well, but I can't because I can't get into the water. And it's been like this for 38 years. I'm pretty much given up any hope of it ever happening because I'm helpless and now I'm hopeless. Now, it can be easy to look at this guy, reading the story thousands of years later and go, well, dude, like, why didn't you get placed closer to the pool? Or like, what a whiner. Like, do something about it, right? But before we go and point fingers at this guy, I would suggest that we think for a moment about a time that maybe we've had something going on in our life and we want something to change or we need something to happen, but we can't think of any way that that is possible. You think of a time like that in your life? And if Jesus were to come along and say to you, do you want to be well? Your knee-jerk reaction could be, I do, but I can't because, and then we start with the excuses. I can't because this person won't do that, or I can't because he won't do this, or I can't because they don't follow what I believe. Whatever it happens to be, the excuses start. You know what was holding this guy back from getting well? It was one thing. It was his solution. It was his solution. His answer was based on his belief that there was only one way for him to get well, and that was for him to get in the water first. That was it. Nothing else would work. I've got to get in the water first. And if that happens, I'll be okay. Otherwise, I can't. Sound familiar? In a way, that what this guy's saying to Jesus is this: I want to get well, but I can't unless someone helps me get into the water. And you look like a strapping young man. Can you help me get in the water? You see, what this guy was asking for was help, when what he really needed was healing. This guy was asking for help, but what he really required was healing. And I'm going to suggest this, that the same is often true for many of us today. We ask God for help when what we really need is healing. We say things like, God, I need your help with my finances. I'm so far behind, I just need help with my finances. Or, God, I need help with my marriage. I want to make it better, but I can't because he won't or she won't. You won't change them. You can't change her. So I want to, but I can't. Or I can't get better because you, God, are not helping me. It's like we're saying, God, this is never going to work because, and you can fill in the blank with whatever your given solution is, isn't happening. And what we're doing is we're almost pretending to trust God. We want to trust God, but here's a question we should ask. What are we trusting him for? I would think, if we're honest, aren't we actually trusting that he'll do what we want in order to get to our solution? Aren't we often trusting that we have it all figured out? And the only real problem is God isn't with our program. And if he just get on the program and do the thing we want, my finances would be better. My marriage would be better or healed. I don't know if you noticed, but do you notice what Jesus didn't do in this story? Jesus didn't offer to get the guy into the water. It's not like he said, oh, you need to get in the water first? Sure, I can help you out with that. Grab him by the arm, drag him down, throw him in the water. He didn't do that. He didn't offer him false hope. He didn't say, look, I really believe that if you just try harder, if you find the right help and do the right thing, one day you'll be first. Just hang in there, brother. Have faith, right? He didn't say that. He didn't make him more comfortable. It's not like he brought along a pillow and said, oh, I really feel bad. Here's a pillow. Just stay where you are. It'll be okay. You'll be fine. He didn't do any of that. Instead, Jesus told him, stand up, pick up your mat, and walk. Stand up, pick up your mat, and walk. Jesus gave him the solution to his problem right then and right there. In that moment, Jesus challenges this guy to do something that he can't do. He hasn't been able to walk for 38 years. And now Jesus is saying, get up, stand up. Here's the thing, that's often how Jesus works. He'll ask us to do the very thing that we can't. And you might be listening this morning and going, well, that just sounds ridiculous. Why would he do that? That seems counterproductive, weird, unfair, ridiculous. I think, and again, I'll just throw this out there for you to think about, but I think it's there in those moments that we come to the end of our rope. We come to the end of ourselves. It's like, I can't do this, and we're completely 100% right. But what we can do is trust on God rather than trusting in our solution and in our abilities. If we want to be well and experience God's healing in our lives, we have to do what he asks. And it begins with standing up. Last April, I had open heart surgery. Lots of you know that. You were on that journey with me. Here's the thing. Just a few hours after having, my chest hacked open with a skill saw or a jigsaw or whatever they used, and then sewn back together with a bunch of piano wire or stainless steel wire, I woke up to a nurse saying to me, this is like 5 hours later, "Hi, Mr. Firth. How are you doing?" Which seems like a dumb question. I just came out of heart surgery, But here's the thing. I was actually doing pretty good. I don't know if you've ever been to the hospital, had surgery, and when you wake up, you're covered in those hot blankets. They got those dryers, and they just keep layering you in these warm blankets. I had tons of those on me, and I was still under the last effects of the anesthetic, and the pain meds were kicking in. I was comfortable. I was thinking, I'm actually doing pretty good. I like this. This is all right. Well, imagine my surprise when the nurse looked at me. She says, "Good, because we need you to stand up." I'm like, stand up? I just got out of surgery. What do you mean stand up? And she says, if you want to get better, you need to stand up. And the rest of my recovery in the hospital, that's how it went down. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 times a day. Every time a nurse or a physiotherapist walked into my room, it was like, it's time to get up. Time to go for a walk. And I'm like, I just went for a walk. Good, let's go for another one. Stand up and pick up your mat. You might, well, what does that mean? Pick up your mat. Well, quite a few years ago, my wife and I, it's probably a century ago that we went to Hawaii and loved it there. And the first day there, of course, what do? You go to the beach, right? So we run down to the beach and we find our little spot. And we were looking around and we noticed people that were coming down to the beach or were at the beach had those little cheap bamboo roll-up mats. We didn't have anything like that. So every time we went into the water, we'd come out, our spot would be gone. And so we thought, well, we got to get one of those mats because everyone else, they'd lay their mat out and they'd stake their territory. Like, this is my spot. And they'd put all their stuff on it and they'd go swimming or play volleyball or whatever and come back and their spot was there. This was much the same. The mat that this guy had in this story did the same thing. It not only provided him something to lay on, it marked his territory. This is my spot. This is where I come every day. This is my spot. And so imagine what Jesus is actually asking him to do when he says, stand up and take your mat. Stand up. Do the very thing that you can't do, that you're going to be able to do, because I'm going to empower you to do it, and then roll up your mat. Pick up your mat. In other words, give up your spot. Because you're not going to need it anymore. Remove yourself from any temptation to relapse back into whatever area it is that you were struggling in. Whether that be an unhealthy relationship, alcohol, drugs, pornography. Roll up your mat and get away, which is the very next thing Jesus asked this guy to do. Stand up, roll up your mat, and walk. There's a saying in the recovery community that's actually steeped in a bunch of wisdom, and we can all learn from it. And it's this: in recovery, you only have to change one thing. Everything. If you're serious about making a change and not continuing with your destructive patterns, or you're staying stuck in an addiction or a habit, everything that supported that behavior, that addiction, needs to change. Your job, where you live, your friends. And the best way to do that is to walk away. Because if you don't, the temptation will be to go back and unroll your mat and park yourself right back where you were. This man's been lying beside this pool for 38 years, almost 4 decades. And Jesus, he does what Jesus asks him to do. And we read this. Instantly the man was healed. He rolled up his sleeping mat and began walking. And then check out what happens. But this miracle happened on the Sabbath. So the Jewish leaders objected, and they said to the man who was cured, "You can't work on the Sabbath. The law doesn't allow you to carry that sleeping mat." I wrote here, how bizarre is that? But it's how stupid is that? Is really what I want to say. I mean, this guy is healed, and all the religious leaders can do is focus in on that he's carrying his mat. For 38 years, this guy has laid on the porch of misery. Now he can walk away from it, and they're like, "You can't do that. You can't carry your mat. It's a Sabbath, and there's no work on the Sabbath, and you're working." The law that they had written for what was considered work was that if you carried something that weighed more than a dried fig, you were breaking the law. It was considered work. And the punishment? Death by stoning. This guy, even though he was healed and he was like, yes, he could be killed for carrying his sleeping mat. Which kind of explains his reaction to them when they asked, the law doesn't allow you to carry your sleeping mat. But he replied, "The man who healed me told me, pick up your mat and walk." Like, it wasn't me. Don't come after me. He's throwing, he doesn't know it's Jesus, but he's throwing this guy under the mat that healed him. It wasn't me. Go after him. And they say, "Who said such a thing as that?" And they demanded that. Like, you tell us, because we got to go get this guy. If there's someone running around telling people to work on this, we need to find him. It says the man didn't know, for Jesus had disappeared into the crowd. But listen to this, and don't miss this part. But afterward, Jesus found him. He found him in the temple, and he told him, now you are well, so stop sinning, or something even worse may happen to you. Now, I just want to kind of camp on that last verse for a minute, because that sounds creepy, doesn't it? You know, something worse may happen to you. It almost sounds like The Godfather, you know, I have a deal for you kind of thing. It's almost like Jesus is like this. I'm watching you. But that's not what Jesus is doing here. This guy doesn't even know who Jesus is. He simply did what he asked him to do, and it resulted in him getting better. And here's the cool thing. That's the power of God's loving instructions to us that are found in the Bible. And how to best live life. But here's the thing. Whether you know Jesus or not, whether you believe he existed, whether you believe in God or not, whether he even exists, if you apply the principles from the Bible to your life, life will get better in those areas. Treat others how you would like to be treated. Imagine if we all did that. Life would be better. Love your neighbor as yourself. Treat your neighbor how you would like to treat yourself. Imagine the relationships with what your neighbors, it would be fantastic. Read Ephesians, a letter written a little bit later in the New Testament. Ephesians 5. It's about the relationship between a man and his wife, husband and wife. And when I do premarital, that's kind of the verses I camp on, because if we all lived and treated each other, husband and wife, the way it's laid out there, we wouldn't need divorce lawyers. I'm not saying life is going to get rosy and, I just need to do this. And I'm not saying that at all. But your relationship with your spouse will be better. Your relationship with others will be better. Your relationship with money will be better. That's the power of God's word. But here's the thing. You can come to church, you can come to the meeting place and apply the biblical principles that we talk about on a Sunday, apply them to your life, which every pastor is like, yes, and experience change, and still not know Jesus. This guy went to church. That's where Jesus found him. He was at the temple, giving thanks. But he still didn't know Jesus. And maybe you're listening this morning and that's your story. You came to this church because you had some stuff going on in your life, and you tried this and you tried that and tried the other thing, and nothing seemed to be working. And it's like, well, I'll try this church thing. And you heard some principles, applied them to your life, and things got better. And you're thinking, yeah, it does work. This is cool. Awesome. But you still haven't experienced the transformational power of God's love and forgiveness. You still don't know Jesus. So in essence, what Jesus is saying to this man is, look, I healed your legs. I healed you, but don't mistake your physical health for your spiritual health. You see, Jesus, oftentimes when he healed somebody physically, it was always he was pointing intentionally to something that had to happen that was more profound and deep, and it was spiritual. So if I had to say, what's the main focus of this story, it's simply this: do not miss Jesus. Don't miss Jesus. Don't miss him like the man in this story did. Even though Jesus healed him, he missed who Jesus really was, because he couldn't see past the physical healing to see the spiritual need that he actually had and was available to him. Don't miss Jesus like the religious rule keepers did. Even though they memorized every scripture that they taught on, every festival, every feast that they attended, even though all of those pointed to Jesus as the Messiah, they still missed him. He didn't line up to what they thought the solution was. What's really interesting in this story is it doesn't really come to a close. This man's healing doesn't come to a close. After his meeting with Jesus in the temple, we read this. Then the man went and told the Jewish leaders that it was Jesus who had healed him. Now, the way that's written, we don't know what tone it was said in. Like, did this guy run up to the religious leaders and say, Jesus healed me, man. It was him that did it. Yeah, go, stick that in your pipe and smoke it. Right? Or was it like, psst, hey, guys, come here. I know who did it. He's the guy over there. His name's Jesus. Go get him. We don't know. But that's the beauty of it. The story is open-ended. Just like your story and my story, they're still open-ended. And so the question I want to leave you with is this. Do you want to be well? Do you really want to be well? If the answer is yes, then don't miss Jesus. Don't miss Jesus, whose mission when he walked around this planet was to bring healing to the spiritual problem that every single one of us is up against. He's come to bring healing to our hearts. And he knows that the only way for us to do that is to enter into a relationship with him and continue to grow it. To get to know him better so we can learn to trust him more. And so when life doesn't make sense or something presses in, we can go to him for healing and not just help. That's who Jesus is. And that's the journey a lot of us are on at the meeting place. And I'm glad I get to be on it with you. I invite you to pray with me. God, we just thank you for these stories that are so deep and rich and just really help put handles on what a relationship with you is all about. And it's not about living a comfortable life, although that's, can be part of it. That's not the goal. The goal is to be in a relationship with you that's not broken anymore. That's why you came to this planet. To walk with us. To reveal to us what God is like. But to ultimately die for each one of us so that we could have a way back to you. And so wherever we find ourselves this morning, my prayer is that we would ask that question. Do I really want to be well? And then look to you for the healing that we're after. Thank you for loving us. We pray this in your name. Amen.